Good evening. Thank you so much for coming on this dark and wintry night. I am Oscar Cox-Jensen. I am a colleague of two of our speakers here in the music department, and it is my privilege and very great pleasure to be chairing tonight's Insights lecture. Two very mundane things. First of all, can you please all have your phones on silent? We will be deeply embarrassed. And we are not expecting a fire alarm, so if one does sound, take it seriously. We will have event stewards. Please follow their instructions, make your way out of the building into the car park. We're going to have the lecture followed by questions from the floor. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. There will be one poor soul with a roving microphone trying to get around people, so bear that in mind. We'll try and get to as many people as we can, in the interests of which I'm going to push on by introducing our three speakers, who will speak in turn, followed by music. First up, we are going to hear from Stephen Rose, who is head of the music department at Royal Holloway, University of London, and is a specialist in music history of the 16th to the 18th centuries, especially in German-speaking lands and here in England. Stephen uses methods from book history, social history, and the digital humanities to understand how music has travelled between communities and how to illuminate attitudes to the writing and performing of musics in this era. And most germane to tonight, he is the leader of the collaborative project Music Heritage Place, unlocking the musical collections of England's county record offices, funded, thank you very much, by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. This is discovering and documenting the musical sources of 3 centuries between 1550 and 1850, held in local archives all over the country, and opening new, decentralised, exciting understandings of English music in this period. Once we've heard from Stephen, he's going to hand over to the first of his 2 co-investigators, both based here at Newcastle. Kirsten Gibson is head of the School of Arts and Cultures here. Her work situates early modern music in wider cultural, social, and political contexts. Her interests include early modern debates about music, gender, class, society in early modern England, history and sound studies, the sale and circulation of printed music through to the 18th century as well, the spread of recreational music making, vernacular and domestic musical cultures, and recovering evidence for musical life in early modern northeast England. In this project, her work seeks to challenge traditional narratives of music history, bringing early modern musical culture into wider debates and establishing new perspectives on English music. And finally, of our 3 speakers, we will hear from Nancy Kerr, who needs no introduction but is always delightful to introduce. She's a performer, composer, educator, researcher, and community musician with over 25 major folk releases in her discography. If you do not have them all, what are you doing? And many commissions for new work from the BBC, the Houses of Parliament, the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, little bits and pieces here and there. BBC Folk Singer of the Year in 2015. Songlines magazine describes her as one of the finest songwriters in English folk. And as co-investigator on this project, she's been focusing aptly on creative practice and engagement, exploring how collaborative archive-to-live practices have been resulting in all kinds of exciting outputs. Many of you will be familiar with the 2 series of the Song Detectorists on BBC Radio 3. If you're not, they are wonderful listens. Also live performances, public workshops, and the production of community and school-specific legacy materials. Very fittingly and satisfyingly, Nancy will then introduce some wonderful musicians who are going to give us a flavour of that. So I would ask you to welcome all 3 of our speakers, and first up is Stephen.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for that introduction, and welcome to this talk which introduces the project Music Heritage Place, a collaborative project to uncover the musical heritage in England's regions and bring it to life for modern communities. We've been described by BBC Radio as the Song Detectorists hunting for musical gold in the local archives of England. So, in this joint talk, I will introduce this project, the aims of it, some of our discoveries, the significance of what we're doing. I'll show how we're uncovering music that was rooted in particular places in the 17th and 18th centuries. Yet those places were also connected through the movement of music and musicians. And then Kirsten will highlight our discoveries of music for some particular groups of people, like farming families, women of different social classes, and, of course, the Newcastle hostman, Henry Atkinson. and then Nancy will share her work, bringing this music to life with her ensemble, the Melrose Quartet, and in community singing workshops. And at the end, we'll hear a performance from some of the amazing students on Newcastle University's folk degree. So starting by introducing this project. Many previous studies of music history of the 17th and 18th centuries have focused on major cultural centres. So London with its royal court, its cathedrals like Westminster Abbey, its public theatres, university cities such as Oxford and Cambridge, cathedral cities such as Durham, Salisbury, York, and of course major trading cities such as Newcastle. And this research, this previous research, has typically been done in the collections of our big major research libraries in this country, like the British Library in London or the libraries in Oxford and Cambridge universities. And the music preserved in those libraries tends to be from the elite musicians of the 17th and 18th century. So court musicians such as Henry Purcell or George Frederick Handel, or a cathedral musician. And these musicians typically wrote complex or ceremonial music for the court and for the church and the theatre. Our project, by contrast, is looking at music history across a broader range of geography and a broader cross-section of society. And we're doing this by going into the county record offices of England. So each of England's counties, about 40 odd of them, has a record office. And the record office holds archives from the local council, from parish churches in that area, and also often from private families. The county record offices are in many different types of location in each county. Sometimes they're in the county town, sometimes they're in an industrial estate on the edge of somewhere, sometimes they're in reclaimed industrial sites. So Northumberland Archives is in Ashington on the site of a former colliery, and that's on the top left of my slide. But also here you can see Surrey in a very fancy modern building, West Sussex in a converted building, and inside the storeroom, the strong room of some of these archives. On this map, the yellow or orange pins show the location of the county record offices that the researchers in our project are visiting. And you can see they're spread across the whole country. And the blue pins indicate for just some of the music that we're uncovering where it was originally made or used. And this map is work in progress, and we need to populate it with many more blue pins as we do more of the research and find more music in areas like North Yorkshire. And one of our researchers has just been in Northallerton and has been finding amazing 17th and 18th century things there. So we need to put some blue pins in North Yorkshire. So through the music preserved in these archives, we can uncover the soundscape of people in past centuries across England. So this might be dance tunes used in 18th century villages, it might be music in parish churches of the 18th century, it might be the music that your ancestors might have experienced down the pub or in the church in past centuries. Until now, a lot of this music in local archives was unknown to musicians and researchers and even local communities. So local archives often lack the resources to have specialist cataloguing of their holdings. So you can imagine a general archivist might not have the ability to read music, and they might, if they see music, they might just describe it with one or two words in their catalogue, like song or tune, and without indicating the full contents or the significance. So what we're doing is we're cataloguing this music in an international database of musical sources, which is called RISM, or Repertoire International des Sources Musicales, which has millions of entries for music across the world, whether it's in Munich, in Germany, in Rome, in South America, but now also with entries for music held in Ashington or in Northallerton or in Kendal. And it's wonderful to populate these international resources with our local treasures. And what we're doing is we're coding the music, so we're coding the opening melodies in a machine-readable form, which means that in this database you can actually search by tune. You can enter your tune and then find it. And this then shows whether the music is unique or shared with other locations. And we're also digitising some music from selected archives like Hampshire and Northumberland. And you can find all these resources from our website. There's a QR code there. There's also a flyer on the table as you leave if you want to have more details about the project. One of the amazing things in the archives is we're finding music in places where no one would expect music to be preserved. In Bedfordshire, books of church law adjudicating on disputes in 17th century parishes also contain the words for songs, like this political ballad, Lay By Your Reason, which is a song from 1688 describing the so-called Glorious Revolution when the Catholic James II, King James II, is chased out by the Protestant William and Mary, supported by Parliament, and a sudden change in governments, in religion, makes people question what actually truth is. It's a very timely ballad in this era of fake news, and you will hear some of it being performed in Nancy's showreel in a moment. In Cornwall and in Suffolk, boxes for legal deeds, so the deeds about people's property, have been lined with pages of printed music, 16th century printed music, psalms, so maybe someone making these legal boxes had access to lots of spare pages, proof sheets maybe from the printer for this music. And most spectacular of all, in Norfolk, the records of Thetford Town Council include this really handsomely bound volume, which was used in the 19th century by the town clerk to make an index to the council minutes. But in doing this, the town clerk was actually repurposing a handwritten book of keyboard music written over a century earlier, and it's partly in the hand of composer Henry Purcell. It contains the earliest version of some of Purcell's keyboard music, written in a way that really makes sense of how it should be played. And this is the first discovery of music in Purcell's hand for over 30 years. So it just shows what incredible treasures the archivists in these local archives are looking after. And it tells us things not only about local communities in Norfolk, but somehow how those communities got hold of music by one of England's kind of finest composers from the 17th century. In our research, we're connecting these musical discoveries with the people and places where this music was originally played and sung. The village of Mileham in Norfolk is in the part of Norfolk that people don't visit. It's not on the coast or the Broads, it's in the agricultural middle of the county. And from 1795, we have the book of the Mileham Church Singers, a handwritten book with the villagers' versions of music, which came from across East Anglia and across the East Midlands. So music originally written or printed in Cambridgeshire, Suffolk, Leicestershire, Essex, and London. So this apparently remote village was well connected with musical centres and activities as much as 150 miles away. The book also contains a list of the 12 singers and 2 instrumentalists who made music in the church. Interestingly, of the singers, 8 of them were tenors. So they clearly had a huge supply of tenor voices in this Norfolk village, rather the opposite of choirs today. And we've been able to trace these musicians with the help of a local historian in the map of the village made when the fields in the village were enclosed in 1812. And we have found out that the musicians were not the big landowners, but they had cottages or small holdings. Some may have been artisans like cobblers, shoemakers. And so as smallholders and artisans, rather than day labourers, these musicians probably had enough income and enough free time, enough ability to organise their day that they could then obtain instruments, they could obtain music, they could practice, they could attend rehearsals. So on this map you can see in So this is the map of the whole village, and then a little inset details section. The green is the largest piece of land owned by any of the village musicians. John Clark, who was also the leader of the basses, and then a tiny cottage owned by the flautist John Gantz, who played. So fascinating to find these people in the landscape, these musicians of the past. And in Shropshire, there survives a manuscript called Shropshire Harmonies. So we thought, might this actually contain music unique to the county of Shropshire? It's in the hand of Thomas Owens, who was a thatcher living near Bishop's Castle in the Shropshire Hills, and he also seems to have taught music in nearby churches. So as a thatcher, someone putting the reeds on people's house roofs, Owens was obviously an artisan, but he clearly had the tools to write. He must have had paper, ink, quill pens, sand to blot what he was writing, and he wrote in a quite an elegant hand. He was obviously neat, an accomplished scribe, and his book contains much church music, some of his own name on it, as if he was the composer, such as this setting of Psalm 66, O Be Joyful, which Nancy has arranged for community choirs, and you will hear that later on. But other pieces in Owen's book are adapted from music which had been written or printed in other parts of the West Midlands or in the southwest of England. Some of the music dates from over a century previously. So this book is clearly rooted in the Shropshire Hills, where Thomas Owens was making music, where he was putting thatch on people's cottages. But it shows his connections with music in other regions. It's very local, but it's also connected. It's also full of mobility. So we will hear a little snatch of music from Shropshire Harmony later, and we'll also hear some music from Milam in Norfolk that Nancy has arranged. But now I'm going to hand over to Kirsten from the music department at Newcastle to tell us about some of the other people we find in these books.
Thanks, Stephen. So perhaps one of the most significant outcomes of the Music Heritage Place project is that by excavating all of the musical holdings from the 16th through to the mid-19th century of England's county record offices, is that we are unearthing, of course, a vast quantity of music. And from this large musical data set, broad patterns of musical learning, of circulation, of communities of music makers are starting to emerge. So I'm going to give a whistle-stop tour of two of those areas. And the first pattern that I would like to highlight is evidence of musical circulation and musical making within rural and farming communities. We've already had a taster of that with Stephen's example from Milam. But I'm going to take us, if I can get the slides right, yes, northward. I'm going to take us to the northwest of England first, because we are unearthing a range of evidence of music making in rural communities in the 18th century from several small handwritten music books that are now held at Kendal Archive Centre. The earliest which you see here dates from around 1720 and is signed by a Richard Alderson. It contains instructions for understanding musical notation, so signs of musical learning, and several notated psalm tunes. But this book is essentially a commonplace book. It doesn't just contain music, and while we don't know exactly who Richard Alderson was yet, we get a flavour of Richard Alderson's life, because within this book we also have intermingled with the music financial accounts, notes on farming, recipes, animal cures, and religious content. So this is a lovely example of how music and musical knowledge was embedded as part of Alderson's everyday life. There's another two small books at Kendal related to the Burkett family of Low Wood Farm near Windermere. This is the first of those two books, and this likewise provides evidence of musical learning and the notation of psalm tunes. The earlier of the two that we see here contains doodles, absolutely beautiful. I didn't have space to put them on the slides, but beautiful drawings of animals, pen trials that you can see, and notated psalm tunes as well. and it's signed multiple times by William Burkett, who we know lived from 1711 to 94, as well as by a Dorothy and an Eleanor Burkett. So it's indicative of shared family use of the same one book. The later book related to the Burketts is signed by Anne Burkett, who was born in 1742, so a later generation. And this includes musical guidance, you can see here, so signs of musical learning, as well as handwritten psalm tunes. So these are like personalised books, maybe of the writer's favourite psalms or the psalms that have been sung most frequently at home or in church by these people. Now, the Burkett books are part of the Brown family papers that are held at Kendal Archive Centre. The Browns owned Town End Farm, which you can see the inside of here, near Troutbeck, near Windermere, and they were related on various generations to the Burketts through marriage. Some people here might have been to Town End. It's a National Trust property, and if you haven't been and you can get, I really, really recommend it. It's a fantastic place to visit. So remarkably, one of the things that interests me about the Browns and Town End is that the Browns' extensive collection of music and books remain at Town End. So you can see the library here in this image. And they include printed psalm books and 4 volumes of popular songs, including songs by the likes of Purcell and Handel. And you can see one of the copies there on the right-hand side of the screen. And the songs, therefore, date from the late 17th century into the early decades of the 18th centuries. The books themselves were printed in the 1730s. From surviving letters of the Browns held in the papers at Kendal, we also get glimpses of their interest in singing the most up-to-date London styles of psalms, evidence of their copying and sharing of psalms amongst the Troutbeck community, which we can see in material evidence from the other surviving books. But it's also apparent that Benjamin Brown owned a violin and played the violin, as well as the family owning a flute, so indicative of both sacred music and secular music practices. Another collection of manuscript music books made by a farming family can be found in the Lincolnshire Archive Office from the late 18th and early 19th century, so moving forward a century. These books relate to the Dixon family of Halton le Moor in Lincolnshire, who rose over 2 generations from renting land to becoming major farming landowners. There are 4 books that were primarily made by Thomas John Dixon, who lived 1785 to 1871. But the earliest book appears to have been initially owned by his father, William Dixon, before it passed or was shared with his son. So these books bear similarities with those found in Kendal. So the sharing of music books and music amongst family members, the inclusion of musical instructions that denote musical learning, and much of the musical contents of these books are also psalm tunes, like the examples we've seen in Kendal, but also include 4-part arrangements of the psalms, so slightly more sophisticated, musically sophisticated examples. But the musical tastes of the Dixons and activities extended to secular music, as we see also with the Browns, because one of these 4 books is a violin tune book, and we know that because we have the fingering written in to explain how to play the piece. And this includes dance music, including both local tunes to Lincolnshire, such as Lord Yarborough's March, which you can see on the screen, as well as popular and nationally circulated tunes. And moving further south to Hampshire, we find the most beautiful handwritten music book dated 1822 of Richard Pyle, who we believe was either a gentleman farmer or wool merchant, a little bit more research to do there, and he was from the village of Netherwallop. Like the Dixons, his music book mixes sacred and secular music. So the book contains country dance tunes, which include the instructions for the dance steps, as well as tunes from the London theatres, including music by Rossini, which you can see on the screen. But at the opposite end of the book, Pyle has copied sacred music into the book, suggesting perhaps he was playing in the local church band on Sundays, a bit like the Milam examples we've been looking at. And again, this mixture really denotes the place of music in people's everyday lives, through ceremony, through devotion, through entertainment. And taken together, these books here, which are just a fraction of our findings so far, start to build a picture of widespread circulation of fashionable music to rural locations, the spread of musical literacy and knowledge, and of thriving communities of music making amongst rural and farming families in really quite rural and far-flung places, away from those musical centres that Stephen described at the beginning of this presentation. Now, another pattern that's emerging is copious evidence of women's musical activities, including learning, copying, arranging, collecting, and commissioning arrangements of music. Women's music making from at least the 16th century right through to the 19th century is, of course, very well known. Any fans of Jane Austen in here, including myself, will be aware of frequent references to women making music in her novels. But the volume of the materials being excavated by Music Heritage Place helps illustrate just how widespread and integral music making was in women's everyday lives, as well as illuminating women's musical tastes and patterns of musical consumption that was local, national, and international. So at Wakefield Archive Centre, for instance, we find a substantial collection of music connected to Louisa Wynne of Nostell Priory. She lived 1800 to 1861. The collection includes copies of handwritten music, as you can see here, made by Louisa herself, as well as printed keyboard and vocal music, and it demonstrates a real taste for continental music, including French and Italian song. The collection is indicative of extensive musical activity of a socially elite female musician engaged in performing, copying, and collecting music. Another aristocratic collection is that of the Osborne family, held in the Yarborough collection back at Lincolnshire Archive Centre. So amongst this collection is a substantial amount of music collected by Lady Charlotte Mary Osborne, later Lane Fox, who lived 1806 to 1836. She was the daughter of George Osborne, the 6th Duke of Leeds. Amongst Charlotte's collection are arrangements of Italian operatic arias. There are arrangements for voice and piano and for voice and guitar, and these are arrangements that she commissioned from professional musicians during her travels in Italy. And you can see, it's not clear probably from where you're sitting, but that this particular example was signed from when she was in Rome. So yes, and other arrangements. There are other arrangements of Italian music in this family collection that were also commissioned by her father, but scraps of paper of Charlotte's writings, as well as signed and often dated fragments of music interspersed in these volumes, indicate that Charlotte also used or inherited these volumes. So again, evidence of family sharing of music. Not all of the women's music held in English county record offices and the musical activities reflect the musical activities and tastes of the aristocracy. There are numerous music books made and compiled by women of more middling status. So turning to Wiltshire, for instance, a bundle of 2 music books containing a mixture of printed and handwritten vocal and instrumental music belonged to Harriet Wills, who lived 1768 to 1865. Harriet was, like Jane Austen, the daughter of a clergyman, and she went on to marry a naval captain in 1803, a bit of a kind of Anne Elliot story, if you know Persuasion. Her collection consists primarily of English music, including popular patriotic songs such as Charles Dibdin's The Soldier's Adieu, which you can see handwritten here. This was a song that actually Jane Austen also copied into her musical collection. So Harriet's tastes are decidedly less continental than her aristocratic contemporaries and denote her engagement through musical tastes and collecting with popular sentiment and current affairs during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. This is very much a whistle-stop tour, but what I'd say in terms of women of more middling status is other things that we've been looking at. We're very, very excited that we are working with 5 volumes of music of the Lister family of Shibden Hall. So anyone knows of Anne Lister, Gentleman Jack. That's one of the musical collections we're working on. And really hot off the press, one of our research associates was in Manchester a week or 2 ago and was looking at a juvenile collection of music made by the novelist Elizabeth Gaskell. So lots of exciting stuff coming out of this, and this is stuff that hasn't been written about really at all or extensively by scholars previously. But to finish my segment, I'd like to introduce you to a music book from Newcastle since we're in Newcastle, which is now held at Northumberland Archives at Woodhorn. So this is the violin tune book of Henry Atkinson, which was begun, oh sorry, I should put the slide on, was begun in 1694. So Atkinson was a hostman. So the hostmen were a company of merchants completely unique to Newcastle, and they basically had a monopoly of the town's booming coal trade. This book has been known really for some time to folk musicians. It contains, and I'm actually showing you on the screen, so it contains it contains actually the earliest notated versions of some tunes that have become associated with the northeast of England. So what you see in here is the earliest known notated variant example of the tune for Bobby Shafto. Another example would be the tune for Sir John Fenwick. So there's quite a number of really the earliest known notated versions. So that's why it's so well known to folk musicians. But to view this book simply as a folk tune book, which is a musical classification, by the way, that Henry Atkinson simply would not have recognised in this period, is also misleading, because it obscures a much richer and more complicated story of musical taste, engagement and circulation. Being able to place this book into a wider context of amateur instrumental tune books from this period, so the turn of the 17th into the 18th century, helps us to see emerging patterns of musical circulation and tastes across the country. Despite the individuality of personal music collections such as Atkinson, so the way I would describe them is slightly crass, but they are really essentially like a playlist, a digital playlist now, where people are collecting their favourite tunes, writing them down. In the case of Atkinson, there's at least 8 different hands in the book, so people are writing into it, but Atkinson's hand is interspersed throughout. So it's his book, but it's indicative of sharing music amongst friends. So despite that individuality around personal taste, I'd say there's also some common hallmarks emerging by being able to place this book in that wider data set we are seeing come through the project. So, for example, like so many tune books of this period we're encountering, Atkinson's book contains an eclectic mix of tunes, including local tunes or seemingly local tunes, as we've seen, but also music from the London theatres. Atkinson's book contains quite a number of arrangements of songs by Purcell from the London theatres, really travelling to Newcastle pretty quickly from being on the London stage. It also includes music copied from printed books of the period, printed in London, distributed across the country, particularly, we're talking about prints by John and Henry Playford. And it also contains nationally popular and very widespread tunes from or associated with broadside ballads and country dancing. So it's a real eclectic mix. And like some of the examples with the psalm books we've seen, it also contains pedagogical notes that denote Henry Atkinson's musical learning and development of musical literacy. So we're going to hear some music at the end from Henry Atkinson's tune book, which I'm really excited about. But this is music that Nancy has, in the words of Matthew Bannister, rewilded. And in the case of Atkinson, she's done so for the Newcastle episode of the Song Detectorists, as well as working with young musicians at the National Youth Folk Ensemble and with our very own music students here at Newcastle University. So I'm going to hand over to Nancy now, who's going to talk about the process of taking the music from archive to live.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you, Stephen. So I'm Nancy. I've been working to engage musical communities with our project. Hopefully, I'm going to get away with saying relatively little and let these musical examples that I have speak to some of those methods and those contexts that are involved in bringing, as we've said, these musical gems back to life. These archive to live methods, as we're calling them, can vary. So sometimes it's about singing or playing directly from the source as written or printed and trying to get as close as possible to what musical participation might have sounded like in that period and in that place. Or it might mean recomposing and rearranging the gems for new performance contexts, or to help tell more of their story, if you like, through the music. And then in some settings, let's say songwriting workshops with lots of different age groups, we've been using the gems as jumping off points for the creation of something completely new. So as you've heard, I've worked with the National Youth Folk Ensemble and in other education and youth music settings. At national music festivals this summer, we delivered some main stage performances, but we also did these big open to all public singing workshops. And then there is the Song Detectorists. So there are 10 programmes over 2 series which you can catch up with on BBC Sounds, and that might be a really good way for you to delve more deeply into the case studies that we've heard of already today. So, what you're going to hear is a show reel of some excerpts of the stage show which Melrose Quartet, which is my ensemble, took to UK music festivals this summer. So these snippets are chosen to illustrate some of Kirsten and Stephen's examples, and particularly those themes of music making in rural communities and women's musical participation and collections. So you're going to hear Danse Canadienne, which is from Louisa Wynn's manuscript in Wakefield. You'll hear the psalm tune called Sheffield, which was found in that Milam Church Singers book, the one with the tenors. We're going to sing a Cornish village Christmas carol, probably collected from tin mining communities, probably or possibly by a woman called Eleanor Morgan. And in the music, we track that song's migration to Australia with that working diaspora. And then we finish with the political ballad, Lay By Your Reason, from Bedfordshire. So we sing that along with one of the forms in which that song family, Lay By Your Reason, still survives today. It's a song called Dominion of the Sword, originally from 1668. And that was set by Martin Carthy in the 20th century and added to over time by singers. Because in this way, what we're able to do is to connect the historical source with the versions of it that we hear today, and often, not exclusively, but often that is as part of living folk traditions and culture. So, the next excerpt shows us rewilding Thomas Owens's Anthem 66, Oh Be Joyful, from the book The Shropshire Harmony. This is at Shrewsbury Folk Festival this summer, and this was captured by the production team on the Song Detectorists for episode 6. So what I did for this was I transcribed the first section of that psalm setting, which you can see here in its lovely upwardly cascading fuging tune, and its West Gallery stave system. This was my first experience of transcribing this kind of music myself. I've sung it, but I've never transcribed it, and I have to say those pedagogical notes, those keys in the beginning of these books reminding you how the music works, was extremely helpful, but invaluable, in fact. So what I did was I created a 4-part SATB sort of standard choir arrangement for this, but I also created a simplified 3-part version because this was geared towards being able to teach this to a couple of hundred singers of mixed abilities by ear in a field in about half an hour. So the little clip shows us putting it together for the first time.
That's our start note for the tune. After 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, be joyful in song, all you lands, all you lands. Oh, be joyful, oh, be joyful in song, all you lands.
So just a little note about that. I also adapted the words for that song in case groups wanted a secular or a more multi-purpose version, and those arrangements have started to be taken up by West Gallery and community choirs, including in the village where it originates, Bishop's Castle. So it's wonderful to see the real rewilding really taking root. And so finally we've turned to Henry Atkinson's manuscript. In a minute I'm going to invite the Stage 1 undergraduate folk ensemble to play their exploration of the tune London's Loyalty. They've been working on this for only a few weeks as part of their recital set this semester. I also want to say I'm really thrilled that the students had the chance to work with the wonderful Alistair Anderson a bit on this tune, because he's such an authority on those Northumbrian repertoires. So I believe that in Henry Atkinson's time this was a popular satirical song. In Atkinson's book, it's written down in what we call a scordatura, which is an alternative fiddle tuning, bringing the G string up to an A. And this can make the mode rather hard to decode, as it were. So we have created an arrangement, or the students have created an arrangement, but the interpretation of this uses both a C natural and a C sharp, although not at the same time. The melody is what we now sometimes call a 3/2 triple time or Old English hornpipe. That's a tune type very strongly associated with Northumberland. So we see this continuity here between Atkinson's capture of topical, fashionable songs of his time and music making today. This is an example of how these materials can be at once ubiquitous and at the same time distinctively local. So, I'm going to ask them to come to the stage, so if you would give them a lovely warm welcome and let them set up the Stage 1 folk ensemble from Newcastle University with London's Loyalty.